It's 7 a.m. in Manhattan. A man in a $1,000 suit walks into a coffee shop, checks his Rolex, grabs a black coffee, and steps into his chauffeured car. 15 minutes later, a young woman walks into the same shop, orders the same coffee, no sugar, and sits down with a notepad. She's dressed in thrift store jeans, her shoes are worn, and her laptop's cracked on one side. The man? He's broke. Massive debt, high lifestyle, zero savings. The woman? She's a self-made millionaire, quietly building wealth while no one notices. Same city, same coffee, two completely different financial lives. This is what the psychology of money is really about. Not spreadsheets, not stock tips, but the strange, emotional, deeply human ways we think about money, how we spend it, how we save it, and how our background shapes every dollar we touch. This isn't a how to get rich book. It's a why do we do what we do with money book. And once you understand the psychology behind money, it changes everything. In this video, we'll break down each chapter of Morgan Housel's best-selling book with real stories, relatable insights, and lessons you'll carry for life. In Chapter 1, Morgan Housel reminds us that when it comes to money, logic often takes a backseat. We're not spreadsheets. We're stories. Let me explain. Picture two people. One grew up during the 2008 financial crisis. They saw their parents lose jobs, their home value crash, and banks close their doors. They're cautious, they save obsessively, and they fear debt. Now picture someone else. Raised in the 2010s during a tech boom, they saw startups become billion-dollar giants overnight. To them, risk is exciting. Credit is a tool. Debt is normal. Same country, same economy, but completely different financial behavior. And here's the key message Morgan drives home. People do crazy things with money, but no one's crazy to themselves. We judge others for being too conservative or too aggressive, but the truth is, we're all just reacting to what life has taught us. Your decisions about money, they're shaped by where you were born, when you were born, your parents' habits, your past jobs, your wins, your traumas. And because no two people have the same experience, no two people will think about money the same way. That's why people clash over investing styles, spending habits, or financial goals. One person is hoarding cash, another is pouring it into high-risk startups. Neither is wrong. They're just playing different games. And here's where this really matters. If you don't understand someone's background, you won't understand their behavior, and that includes your own. So what do we do with this? We learn to stop assuming others are irrational, and we start asking, what life experiences made this behavior feel rational to them? Because behind every decision is a story you don't see. Objective of this chapter, to reframe how we see financial behavior, not as logical or illogical, but as deeply personal and shaped by experience. You'll stop judging other people's choices so harshly, and you'll start becoming more curious and forgiving about your own. Because when it comes to money, no one's crazy. We're all just human. Chapter 2, Luck and Risk. We love neat stories. This person worked hard and got rich. This person made dumb choices and lost it all. But in Chapter 2, Morgan Housel reminds us that behind every story of success or failure, there's a force we often ignore: luck and risk. Let's talk about Bill Gates. He's brilliant, sure. But did you know he happened to attend one of the only high schools in America that had a computer in 1968? Out of all the schools in the country, his had one. He had access to resources that most kids didn't. That's luck. And then there's Kent Evans, right? Bill Gates' childhood friend. Just as smart, just as ambitious, but he died in a mountaineering accident before graduating high school. That's risk. Here's Morgan's point. Luck and risk are siblings. They're both outside your control, and they both shape more outcomes than we care to admit. Yes, hard work matters. Yes, smart choices matter, but so does timing. So does where you're born. So does that one random encounter that changed your life. And if we don't acknowledge this, we start believing dangerous things like success is always earned. Failure means someone screwed up. But the truth is, you can do everything right and still lose. You can make terrible decisions and still win. So what does this mean for us? It means we should be humble when we succeed, because luck likely played a part. And we should be compassionate when others fail, because risk might have blindsided them. It also means we should stop copying other people's financial moves blindly. Like, you don't know what part of their success was skill and what part was pure chance. Objective of this chapter, to help you stop oversimplifying success and failure and recognize the massive role that luck and risk play in both. Outcome. You'll become less arrogant about your wins, less harsh about your losses, and more focused on building a strategy that works in an unpredictable world, because life isn't fair, but it can still be played wisely. Chapter 3, Never Enough. In Chapter 3, Morgan Housel takes aim at the single most dangerous financial trap, the never-ending hunger for more. He gives us the story of Bernie Madoff, a man who had more money and status than most people could ever dream of, but it wasn't enough. So he cheated, lied, and built a Ponzi scheme. Eventually, it all collapsed, and he lost everything. Not just money, but legacy, family, dignity. Why? Because he couldn't say, that's enough. And then Morgan gives us the opposite story. Ronald Reed, a janitor, lived simply, bought cheap cars, never bragged, but when he passed away, he left behind an $8 million fortune. How? By saving, investing, and being content. Here's the punchline. There is no reason to risk what you have for what you don't need. This chapter forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. When will it ever be enough? If you don't define that for yourself, you'll always be one deal, one bet, $1 away from blowing it all, because the world will always tempt you to want more. More status, more returns, more power. But if you don't know when to stop, you'll end up like Madoff, not Ronald Reed. Objective of this chapter: to show that the inability to feel enough is what drives otherwise smart people to ruin. Outcome: you'll walk away realizing that the real goal isn't getting rich fast. It's building a life you don't have to escape from. And that starts with defining your enough. Or starts with a simple fact that shocks most people. Warren Buffett made over 99% of his wealth after his 50s. Not because he suddenly got smarter, but because he kept investing longer than anyone else. Here's the kicker. If Buffett started investing at 30 and retired at 60, he'd still be rich. Yes, but not even close to being one of the richest people alive. So what's the real secret? Time. Morgan Housel calls this chapter Confounding Compounding, because compounding is wildly powerful, but also wildly misunderstood. Here's why. Compounding works like magic, but it doesn't feel like magic. It feels slow. It feels boring. You don't see the results at first, but let it keep going for decades, and the curve bends upward like a rocket. Morgan puts it this way: good investing is not necessarily about earning the highest returns. It's about earning pretty good returns for the longest period of time. That's the game. Not chasing fast wins, not timing the market, just staying in it long enough to let compounding do its thing. But most people don't have the patience for that. They want fast results. They want to double their money this year, so they jump in and out. They panic when things dip. They miss the upside chasing shortcuts. And in doing that, they kill the magic. Because compounding is like planting a tree. It doesn't matter how much you water it in the first week. What matters is that you don't dig it up. Objective of this chapter: to shift your mindset from short-term returns to long-term behavior and help you deeply understand how wealth is built over time, not all at once. Outcome: you walk away thinking, how can I stay in the game for 30 years, not just win this year? Because in money, patience is power, and time is your greatest asset. Chapter 5, Getting Wealthy versus Staying Wealthy. It's easy to admire people who got rich, but in Chapter 5, Morgan Housel makes a sharp distinction. Getting wealthy and staying wealthy are two different skills. Getting wealthy, that's about risk, boldness, optimism, taking big swings, betting on yourself. Staying wealthy, that's about humility, paranoia, and the willingness to say, this might not last. Let me tell you a story. Imagine a guy in his 30s who goes all in on a crypto coin. In 18 months, he's a millionaire. Everyone's praising his genius, but he doesn't cash out. He doesn't diversify because he thinks, if I made 1 million, I can make 10. Then the crash hits and he's back to zero. Now contrast that with someone who makes less but saves steadily, invests conservatively, doesn't chase hype. That person, they're still growing, still in the game. Morgan says, there are a million ways to get wealthy, but there's only one way to stay wealthy: some combination of frugality and paranoia. In other words, don't assume the future will always look like the past. Don't believe you're invincible just because you had a few wins. Don't think you're safe because you're smart. Because wealth isn't just something you build, it's something you have to protect. So what's the real takeaway here? Winning a few rounds in the money game is great, but if you want to win the whole tournament, you need to avoid ruin. You need to survive. Objective of this chapter: to teach that the traits needed to stay wealthy, like caution, discipline, and humility, are different from those that build wealth. Outcome: you stop chasing only growth, and you start asking yourself, how do I make sure I don't lose what I've built? Because in the end, staying wealthy isn't about brilliance, it's about not blowing it. Most people think that success in investing, or business, or life comes from getting it right. But in Chapter 6, Morgan Housel flips that idea upside down. He shows us that the biggest wins in life often come from just a few rare, lucky, messy moments, the tails. He calls them tail events, and they're way more important than we realize. Here's what he means. Imagine this. You make 100 investments in your lifetime. Maybe 60 of them break even. 30 actually lose money, but just 10, maybe even just 2 or 3, absolutely explode. They go 10x, 20x, they pay pay for everything else. Those few big winners, they carry your whole portfolio. It's just like in baseball. You don't win because you hit a bunch of singles. You win because you hit a couple of home runs. Morgan gives us the perfect example. Warren Buffett. People call him a stock-picking genius, and he is. But even Buffett's portfolio follows this rule. The vast majority of his returns have come from a tiny handful of companies. Coca-Cola, American Express, Apple, everything else, pretty average. In fact, Morgan says a small number of events account for the majority of outcomes. And it's not just about stocks or business. Look at your life. You probably have just a few key moments that changed everything. That one job offer, that one chance meeting, that one decision to take a risk. That's a tail event. But here's the mistake most people make. They expect success to be linear, predictable, fair. They think, if I make 10 investments, 8 of them should win. If I put in hard work, I should always see results. But reality's messy. It's lopsided, unfair, random. And that's okay if you learn to expect it. So what do you do with this knowledge? You accept that you only need a few things to go really right. And your job becomes this: stay in the game long enough for those things to happen. Keep swinging, because you never know which swing will be the home run. Here's the real wisdom. You don't have to be right all the time. You don't have to be right all the time. You just have to be right big once in a while. So don't beat yourself up over the failed ideas, missed opportunities, or small losses. They're just part of the game. It's not about being perfect, it's about being patient. Objective of this chapter: to show that most outcomes in money and life are driven by a small number of wild, unpredictable, positive events. This chapter teaches us to stop expecting every move to pay off and instead focus on staying in the game. Outcome: you walk away with a new mindset. I only need a few things to go right. I just need to give them enough time and enough tries to happen. It's not about never failing. It's about giving yourself enough chances to win big just once. Because in the real world, tails don't just matter. They're everything. In chapter 7, Morgan Housel breaks down what that word really means when it comes to money. Think about this. The most valuable form of wealth is control over your time. The ability to wake up and decide how you spend your day. No boss, no meeting you dread, no schedule you didn't choose. You might think $1 million paycheck equals success, but what good is money if you're always stuck in someone else's plan? Morgan tells the story of a wealthy executive who once said, "I have a private jet, but I have no time to see my kids. What I'd give to trade this jet for 3 slow mornings a week." That's the message. Real wealth isn't about stuff, it's about flexibility. Housel uses research too. He points to surveys where people say things like, "I just want to do what I want when I want. I don't want to feel rushed. I want time for my family, my hobbies, my peace." We keep chasing promotions, followers, bonuses, but the real dream, it's being able to say, "I'll work on what I care about on my terms." The irony? Most people trade freedom for money, thinking the money will eventually give them freedom. But then they build a lifestyle that's so expensive, they're trapped trying to maintain it. More income, more pressure, less control. It's a treadmill, not a finish line. Morgan calls it like it is. The highest dividend money pays is the ability to control your time. That's the mic drop moment. So what does this mean for your financial life? It means your definition of success might need to change. Not how much money can I make, but how much control do I have over my time? Am I buying freedom or just more stuff? This chapter also reminds us, wealth isn't always visible. Someone driving a 10-year-old Toyota and working 4 days a week might be wealthier in freedom than someone in a Benz buried in 80-hour weeks, because they have autonomy. And that's what most of us are really chasing. Objective of this chapter: to show that the true goal of building wealth is freedom over your time and choices, not possessions or status. Outcome: you walk away thinking, I don't just want more money, I want more control. And you begin designing your life to buy freedom, not just luxury. Because the richest person isn't the one with the biggest paycheck, it's the one who owns their time. A shiny sports car zooms past. You think, wow, that guy must be rich. Must be successful, must be cool. But here's the twist. You're not admiring the driver, you're admiring the car. And that's exactly what Morgan Housel unpacks in chapter 8, called the man in the car paradox. Here's the paradox. We buy luxury items hoping people will notice us, but most of the time, they don't. They notice the thing, the car, the watch, the house. And they think, if I had that, people would admire me, not, wow, I admire them. It's like we're trying to impress people who aren't even paying attention to us. Morgan tells a story of a man driving a Ferrari through Los Angeles. Someone walks by and says, wow, if I had that car, people would think I'm successful. But that person doesn't think about the driver at all. They just imagine themselves in the car. That's the paradox. We chase status symbols to gain admiration, but those symbols rarely give us what we're looking for. So what do we do with that? We stop buying things just for the sake of image. Because real respect, Morgan reminds us, doesn't come from what you flaunt. It comes from how you treat people, how you carry yourself, how you live your values. Objective of this chapter: to help you see that material things rarely earn you the admiration you're hoping for, at least not the kind that lasts. Outcome: You'll think twice before making a purchase just to impress others. And you'll start focusing on quiet confidence, not loud displays, because the people truly worth impressing aren't impressed by what you own. Chapter 9 is what you don't see. Wealthy-looking people aren't always wealthy. That's the truth. Chapter 9 opens with, and it hits hard. Morgan Housel makes a powerful distinction. Spending money to show people how much money you have is the fastest way to have less money. Let's break that down. When you see someone with a fancy car, designer clothes, or a huge house, you're seeing spending, not wealth. Because real wealth is invisible. It's the money that isn't spent. The investment's quietly growing in the background. The emergency fund you'll never see on Instagram. Morgan uses a perfect metaphor. Imagine two people. One drives a $90,000 BMW but has $5,000 in savings. The other drives a 10-year-old Honda but has $400,000 in index funds. Which one is actually wealthy? It's the second one. But in public, the first one looks rich, and that's the trap. The culture trains us to perform wealth, to signal success by what we wear, drive, and post online. But every dollar you spend to look rich is a dollar you're not investing to become rich. And over time, that adds up. Objective of this chapter, to redefine wealth, not as what's flashy or seen, but as what's quietly accumulated and protected. You'll start measuring your financial progress in net worth, not lifestyle upgrades. And you'll understand, real wealth is silent. Spending is loud. Chapter 10, Save Money. If you remember nothing else from the psychology of money, remember this chapter. Chapter 10 is simple, but powerful. Save more money. Morgan Housel puts it plainly. Building wealth has little to do with your income or investment returns, and lots to do with your savings rate. Think about that. We obsess over returns. We ask, should I invest in crypto? What's the best stock right now? How can I double my money? But few people ask, how much am I saving every month? Morgan says saving is the foundation, part you control the most. You don't need a financial degree to spend less than you earn. You just need habits, awareness, discipline, and that's empowering. He tells us, saving money gives you options, freedom, time. It gives you breathing room when life throws punches, and it always does. High income helps, good investing helps, but nothing beats a solid savings habit. So if you're not sure what to do next financially, don't overthink it. Start by saving more than you did last month, though even just 1% more. Over time, that habit will do more for your wealth than any hot stock pick. Objective of this chapter, to reframe saving as a powerful wealth-building tool, not just a sacrifice or a backup plan. Outcome, you'll realize that the most reliable way to get rich isn't fancy investments. It's living below your means and stacking those quiet, consistent savings over time. Because saving isn't about being cheap, it's about being free. Chapter 11, Reasonable, Rational. Logic is great, but when it comes to money, being reasonable beats being perfectly rational. That's the theme of Chapter 11. Morgan says this bluntly, you're not a spreadsheet, you're a person, and people make decisions with their hearts, not just calculators. Let's say a rational investor looks at the numbers and decides they can make higher returns with 100% stocks, but emotionally, they're uncomfortable with the risk. They check their portfolio daily. They panic when it drops. Eventually, they sell at the worst time. That's the danger of ignoring what feels right in favor of what looks good on paper. Morgan argues for reasonable financial behavior, even if it's technically less efficient. If putting some money in cash helps you sleep at night, do it. If paying off your mortgage early gives you peace, even if the math says invest that money, do it. Because consistency matters more than perfection. Rational decisions only work if you can stick to them. And you'll only stick with a plan that feels good to you. So the goal isn't to optimize every dollar. The goal is to make smart choices you can actually live with for decades. Objective of this chapter, to show that the best financial plan isn't the most logical. It's the one you can stick to long term. Outcome, you'll start making money decisions that fit your personality, not just the spreadsheet. Because in the end, the best strategy isn't the smartest. It's the one you don't abandon. In Chapter 12, Morgan Housel reminds us of a humbling truth. History is the study of change, ironically used as a map of the future. We look to the past to make sense of what's coming, but most of what shapes the future is stuff that's never happened before. Think about it. The most important financial events in your lifetime were probably surprises. 2008 crash, COVID-19 lockdowns, crypto going mainstream, AI boom. None of these were predictable, but they changed everything. And that's Morgan's point. The biggest risks and rewards are usually things no one sees coming. So what does that mean for your money? It means don't build a plan assuming the future will look exactly like the past. Don't obsess over the last recession, the last bubble, the last trend, because the next big shift will be something totally different. That's why the smartest investors leave room for surprise. They build flexibility into their plans. They keep a cash cushion. They stay humble because the future is always up for grabs. Objective of this chapter: to warn us against blind trust in historical data and to teach that the future is full of unknowns. Outcome: you'll start preparing not just for what's likely, but for what's possible. Because in money, it's not the average event that changes your life, it's the outlier. Morgan Housel calls this chapter room for error, and it's about something most people ignore: margin of safety. Here's the idea: no matter how smart or prepared you are, things will go wrong. Jobs get lost, markets crash, unexpected expenses pop up, life happens. And the people who survive financially aren't the ones who made perfect plans. They're the ones who plan for things not going according to plan. Let's say your budget assumes you'll always earn $5,000 a month, but what happens if you lose your job for 3 months? Do you have a buffer? Or you invest everything in stocks? But what if the market tanks the day before you plan to cash out? Morgan says you have to plan on your plan not going according to plan. That's not pessimism, that's wisdom. Smart people leave room for error. They don't spend every dollar they earn. They diversify their investments. They save more than they think they'll need. They assume things will break because they always do. And that margin, that safety net, that's where peace of mind lives. Objective of this chapter: to encourage you to build in buffers, financially and emotionally, because uncertainty is part of life. Outcome: you'll stop planning for a perfect world and you'll start preparing for a messy one, which is the only kind that exists. Because success doesn't require perfection, it just requires survival. Chapter 14. And in Chapter 14, Morgan Housel gently reminds us, your goals, tastes, and values will evolve. And that's okay. We often make long-term decisions with short-term emotions, like choosing a career path we think we'll love forever, setting a retirement number without knowing what future us will value, buying a dream home that turns out to be a financial anchor later, and when we change, we feel guilty or trapped. But Morgan says that's part of life. He calls this the end of history illusion. It's this belief that we've changed a lot in the past, but we won't change much in the future. But the truth, you're always becoming someone new. And your financial plan should reflect that. Leave space to shift directions, to redefine success, to chase new dreams. Morgan puts it beautifully. The trick is to accept the reality of change and plan accordingly. Don't over-optimize for a version of yourself that might not exist in 20 years. Objective of this chapter: to help you realize that changing your mind isn't failure, it's growth. Outcome: you'll start building flexibility into your plans. You'll embrace change, not fight it, and you'll understand it's okay to pivot because your best future self hasn't even been met yet. Chapter 15, Nothing's Free. Morgan Housel shares a hard truth. Everything has a price, but not all prices look like dollar signs. And in Chapter 15, he asks, are you willing to pay the emotional price of building wealth? Because here's the thing, want to earn big returns? You have to accept volatility. Want to grow your business? You'll face uncertainty. Want to build something meaningful? You'll sacrifice comfort. Nothing's free. Morgan says the real cost of success in money isn't always visible. It's often stress, doubt, boredom, and patience. You don't get wealthy by avoiding discomfort. You get wealthy by being willing to tolerate it. The problem is people want wealth without paying the emotional price. They want calm markets, fast growth, zero losses. But that's not how the game works. It's like buying a house but refusing to pay closing costs, or going to the gym but expecting no soreness. Every reward has a cost. The question is, will you pay it up front, or will you bail when the emotions kick in? Morgan's advice: stop seeing fear, risk, or discomfort as red flags. Start seeing them as the fee for admission to the wealth club. Objective of this chapter: to teach you that financial success always has a price, and that price is usually emotional, not financial. Outcome: you'll stop resisting discomfort, you'll start preparing for it, because the price of greatness is rarely cheap, but always worth it. In Chapter 16, Morgan Housel explores something we rarely talk about in finance. People play different financial games, and it's dangerous to take cues from people playing a different game than you. Let's say someone sells a stock and makes a killing. It's all over Twitter. It's on Reddit. You feel tempted. Should I buy what they're buying? But wait, what if that person is a day trader and you're building a retirement fund, or they're gambling with house money while you're saving for your kids' college? That's the trap. You're comparing your strategy to someone whose goals, timeline, and risk tolerance are totally different. Morgan warns, be careful who you take advice from and who you admire. Not everyone's playing your game, because what looks smart in one game can be a disaster in another. The solution? Get clear on your own game. Are you trying to retire early? Buy a home in 10 years? Create generational wealth? Know your timeline. Know your why. And then build a strategy that fits your game, not someone else's highlight reel. Objective of this chapter: to help you avoid making emotional money decisions based on people who are playing a totally different financial game. Outcome: you'll stop copying others blindly. You'll start trusting your own plan. And you'll remind yourself, I don't need to win someone else's game. I just need to play mine well. Chapter 17, The Seduction of Pessimism. Here's a funny thing about humans. When someone says the world's about to end, we listen. But when someone says things will probably be fine, we tune out. Why? Because, as Morgan Housel explains in Chapter 17, pessimism sounds smart. Optimism often sounds like a sales pitch. There's a reason why the news is 90% negative. We're drawn to fear. We treat warnings as wisdom, and we forget that history shows progress usually wins. Yes, recessions happen, crashes happen, bad actors mess things up. But over time, humans rebuild, markets recover, innovation returns. Morgan tells us that pessimism is seductive because it feels like you're being cautious. But if you let it dominate your thinking, you end up sitting on the sidelines, missing opportunities, waiting for the storm that never comes. Optimism isn't about ignoring risks. It's about acknowledging that even when things break, we figure it out. It's not blind faith. It's confidence in long-term human progress. Objective of this chapter: to show how pessimism can cloud your judgment and rob you of long-term wealth. Outcome: you'll develop realistic optimism. You'll expect setbacks, but also recoveries. And you'll stop letting fear control your future, because the world may wobble, but it tends to move forward. Chapter 18, When You'll Believe Anything. Chapter 18, Morgan Housel takes us into the wild world of emotional money decisions. He shows us how, during booms and busts, logic goes out the window. People start believing anything that helps them feel safe or hopeful. During bubbles, we hear stuff like, housing prices can't go down, crypto will make everyone a millionaire, tech stocks never lose. And when panic hits, the market's going to zero. The banks will collapse. It's all over. None of it is rational, but it feels good because we're scared or greedy or desperate, and we'll believe anything that gives us comfort. Morgan says, everyone has an incomplete view of the world, but we fill in the gaps with stories that make us feel better. Sometimes those stories are harmless, but in finance, they can be deadly because bad decisions often come from believing emotional lies. So what do? We step back. We question the stories we're telling ourselves. We ask, am I acting on facts or on fear? Objective of this chapter: to help you recognize when emotion, not truth, is driving your money beliefs. Outcome: you'll become a more grounded decision maker, less reactive, more thoughtful, because money is emotional, but your actions don't have to be. Chapter 19, All Together Now. And now we arrive at Chapter 19, the final chapter. Morgan Housel calls this one All Together Now because it's where everything comes full circle. He recaps the most powerful lessons of the book and invites us to put them into practice. Here are a few of the principles that stick. Getting wealthy and staying wealthy are two different games. Saving is more important than income. Compounding is the real magic trick. Most success comes from a few tail events, not constant wins. You don't need to be the smartest, just consistent, reasonable, rational. The goal is freedom, not flash. But more than anything, Morgan's final message is this: there's no single right way to manage money, only what works for you. You don't need to copy anyone. You don't need to optimize every percentage. You just need to understand your goals, your risk tolerance, and your values. Then build a plan that fits you and stick with it. He leaves us with humility because wealth isn't just about money. It's about behavior, patience, clarity, and knowing that you're playing the long game. The objective of this chapter: to help you see money not as a math problem, but as a deeply personal journey. Outcome: you walk away with confidence, not perfection, with perspective, not panic, and with a calm voice in your head that says, I don't have to be brilliant. I just have to be consistent and kind to my future self. So, after 19 chapters, here we are. If this book has taught us anything, it's that money isn't just about spreadsheets and strategy. It's about behavior. It's about the stories we tell ourselves, the emotions we wrestle with, the habits we stick to or don't. It's about understanding that wealth is quiet and that real success is often invisible. You don't need a six-figure income. You don't need to beat the market. You don't need to copy what others are doing. What you need is a plan that fits your life. A little humility, a little patience, and the willingness to play the long game, even when it gets boring. So if any part of this resonated with you, if you saw yourself in these stories, or if it just made you think a little deeper about how you handle money, then do this. Hit like, drop your favorite lesson in the comments. And if you want more timeless wisdom like this, subscribe and stick around. This isn't the end of the journey. It's the beginning of your financial clarity. Thanks for being here. Be wise, be patient, and take care of your future self.